All right, straight into it. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's Global Virtual International Conference entitled Romance, Sex and Relationships in Travel and Tourism. Now, I'm Birgit Trauer, the chairwoman of today's webinar and also the moderator, and along with Risa, help here to facilitate today's event as best as possible. Surely there might be something going wrong, but bear with us, we're going to fix it along the way. Now, we're truly delighted to welcome you all here today, no matter where you might be around the world, watching and listening via Zoom or our Facebook and Instagram and YouTube channels. Of course, our special thanks and welcome goes to our speakers, who have generously set aside their time to share their thoughts with us here today. So thanks again for everyone to accept our invitation so enthusiastically. Much appreciated. And as always, I'm not sure whether Dr. Talib Rifa is here. He is normally always a patron to these events. And if he's turning up later on, again, we can welcome him later on. Now, before we go ahead, just a few notes for today's progression before we start. Like most online virtual conferences or webinars, there will be limited time available for the speakers to share what I like to call the nuggets of wisdom. Each speaker will share their insights in about 10 to 15 minutes, and we will progress with the speakers first before we open up the Q&A session. So please note down any thoughts you might have along the way, right? And then we can address them later on. We also like to point out right here that everyone can access today's event and all previous ones directly via our website. We can also access the extended profiles of all the speakers. I will introduce the speakers shortly before their presentations, but again, only very briefly. Just a note at this time, the sequence as per the posting on our website along with the registration has changed slightly. Dr. Xavier will be the second speaker, followed by Dr. Oscar and the others accordingly. So a slight change there, not much. And also because Dr. Yeba is unable to present here today at the live session, she has graciously sent us a video, which we will play at the end after Dr. Lisa's presentation. All right. After all of that, I will conclude with some summary comments before inviting you all to join us in the Q&A session. Now, before we start, I'd like to share, if I may, just a couple of background points as to the title of today's event. I was asked, when I mentioned it to various people, why romance, sex and relationship in travel and tourism? Yes, it is a sexy title, I've been told, and one that raised some eyebrows initially because of the word sex. To me, however, the title not only stops many in their tracks, so to speak, but it alludes to having difficult conversations, often avoided in daily life, if not indeed the public domain related to travel and tourism. Now, some people here might already know that this whole agenda, along with the idea of peace, which is an underpinning agenda for the Institute Tourism, has been of interest to me for many years. Now, if you're interested, please see our previous webinars, including the one on intimacy in tourism 2 years ago, and also mental health in travel and tourism. Now, I see peace and the topics of today actually as intimately related, because in my perspective, my view, peace starts at home, in our most intimate relationships with inner and outer peace of concern, peace within us and peace in our relationships. Now, I'd like to add another little amusing experience with regard to today's event, if I may, again. When I first mentioned the title and the fact that it is academics who will be talking about romance, sex and relationships, people smiled at me and said to me facetiously, what would academics know about these things? For them, it's all mind stuff. However, let me assure you, you will find that while research might be a matter of the mind that requires cognitive and rational approaches, the topics have been approached with the emotional and physical experience very much in mind. Besides, let's not forget, while the heart is a symbol of romance and emotions, the heart is a muscle, and the control, power is located in our brains, and that also applies to sex. Now, given the title of today's event, what is the overall aim? It is to stir curiosity and expand our views on romance, sex, and relationships, looking at these from different perspectives as they relate to travel and tourism, sure, but also our private lives. Tourism, after all, is a microcosm of society, and travel does not exist in isolation from our daily lives at home. Now, today's speakers come from different social science backgrounds and with different approaches, viewing the topics from different angles, from light to dark notions of tourism experiences, from joyful and enriching experiences to those of disillusionment. And with in mind, I always like to point out, we are all looking at the tourism industry's involvement in all of this. Each speaker in their own way offers insight for valuable education under the banner of travel and tourism and beyond. To realize the need to build knowledge and understanding, resilience and competence to face the challenges inherent in love and modern relationships in our globalized world, with cultural overt and covert messages of individualism, sexism, ageism, if not hedonism, and romantic consumerism, to mention just a few. I believe, personally, we need to learn not only how to travel peacefully and responsibly, we need to learn how to love, how to share intimacy, how to contribute to and live healthy relationships, something most of us have not learned or been taught. These are just my thoughts for the beginning of the webinar. Now, with this introduction, let us dive in, shall we? The first speaker, if I may introduce, is Dr. Moji Shahvali. He holds a PhD in Recreation, Park and Tourism Management from Penn State, USA. Moji Shahvali is a lecturer at the Department of Leisure Studies at Breda University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. He is sometimes referred to as Dr. Love on campus and researches formation and maintenance of romantic relationships during various leisure activities. And of course, travel very much is a leisure activities. So is, of course, sex, as we will hear later on. As a lecturer, he teaches research methods and statistics courses and is a partner in a number of international and EU education projects. His publications include Couples, Vacations, and Romantic Passion and Intimacy, and Human Connection and Crucial Ingredient in Vacation Experiences. Well, Moji, it is all yours. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Bridget, and greetings, everyone. Wonderful introduction, lovely session, indeed a very nice topic. One that is not usually very up high on the list of different topics that we have in this big field of tourism. I'll start a timer here because I love these topics and I can talk for very long. When I told my partner that I'm having a talk being an expert of relationships, she said, I agree with you that you're an expert in relationship, but I don't know how much she meant it. I'm going to start sharing my slides here. I do have 5 slides that I can go through to give our talk a little bit of a structure. Can you see it okay? Yeah, all right. Awesome. So just to give you a little bit of a background of how I ended up where I am right now. So I found this tourism in a business school back home in Iran, where I spent most of my youth in Tehran. And it was mostly about how we can provide better services to get more money, bottom line. So it was, the psychology part of it was interesting because we had to understand the decision-making behavior of travelers and why they do what they do and how we can influence that. But then when I went for my PhD at Penn State, we were housed in a College of Health and Human Development. So it was more about leisure and well-being, how we can make sure that people leave our destinations and come back home slightly better than how they left. And 6 years forward, I did not want to go back to that marketing perspective, and I wanted to explore more. And having this geeky attitude towards everything, I wanted data. I wanted things that really show and kind of prove that, first of all, vacations are really good for you and your relationship, and what are some of the mechanisms that play a role. And today I thought I share one recent research we did, and then mention 7, 8 areas that I think are worth exploring as kind of next steps in this area from a research perspective, but also being in an applied school, I keep trying to think how designers, whether it's individuals or service providers, how they can maybe use some of that for better tourism for relationships. Okay, so if I want to summarize my PhD in one sentence, I found that about 10% of relationship functioning at the end of the year of romantic couples could be nicely predicted by their travel behavior throughout the year. Meaning that if not just the number of vacations, but what they did on their vacations, we were able to see how that really plays a role in how cohesive, flexible, how well they function. And that was the start of the investigations that I did. And then I thought, okay, if I'm talking about relationships, I better team up with, there's a literature on it, there are departments on this, relationship theories we have. So I teamed up with Art Aaron and John Coffey, who is now at Arizona State. And in 2 rounds, we looked at over 400 American couples. These were living together in committed relationship, no kids in the house, because, you know, when kids are in the picture, then the travel is more about them than the partners. They were mostly 25 to 35 years old, and mostly in their first 5, 6 years of a relationship, to give you an idea of what kind of sample we studied. And we found 2 interesting things. One was that clearly, the longer they were in a relationship, the lower their sex and physical intimacy was. And that has been shown over and over again in relationship research. And a lot of us personally might have experienced that fluctuation in our relationships with our significant others. I sometimes joke about it, but it has some reality to it that changing partners is one solution, but that is not the best solution. The thing that we found was, though, a second finding, that a lot of self-expanding experiences on these vacations that they had throughout the past year of these 400 couples really helped with this lowering of romantic passion and intimacy. These are things like, I don't know, you go on a travel and you try this crazy new food, or even you learn how to cook that. Or it could be as easy as, I took notes here, like having a conversation, very deep, highly disclosing, that you wouldn't typically have on a day-to-day basis. Or just putting your shoes on while it's raining, taking this hike that you wouldn't usually take. And if you like graphs, which I do, you can clearly see this relationship going up as self-expanding experiences during those vacations that we studied and measured went up, passion went up. Interestingly, this only showed in couples who traveled together, and not couples who once in a while not travel together, at least not in their last vacation. It was not significant for those who traveled solo. I would love to hear from other panelists, especially later in this presentation. I know I've read some amazing articles from you as how taking those alone time, me time, once in a while matters. So one of my questions that I would love to answer before I retire is, what would be an ideal combination of vacations for families and partners in terms of how much should it be like together, alone, with friends, etc., throughout a year. So this was an example of a recent study, and what I promised that I would share with you, and I've been thinking about this for the last month for this conversation, is yes, we generally assume that travel experiences, if you do it with people, are pretty good for you and for your relationship. More and more research is coming out linking vacations to mental health and well-being. We know some psychological mechanisms that play a role, like detachment from work, relaxation, mastery, flow, etc. But it's still quite a black box. And there's so many cool things that I think deserves some scientific attention and also some interventions that people out in the industry. We work quite with a lot of museums around here, for example, and we offer some designs that they practice and they let us test which one works better. There's some things that we can really start to look into with a rather more critical scientific lens. I'm still doing okay on time, I think. So, okay, so fundamentally, and I have some colleagues who are really deep invested into this. It's a lot of these mechanisms go back to these shared positive emotions that really marks a difference. What Barbara Fredrickson calls love by definition. And I think we all agree now that just sharing these positive emotions takes an experience to the next level compared to an individual experience. Now we have lots of cool statistical models that we can look at, actor-partner models, or measure physiological synchrony. How do people experience these arousing, engaging experiences together or not? So that's one thing that it's still being done. And we can stop there, or we can go higher and look at some of the negative experiences, some of the challenges that people have. We all know that vacations are not always nice and easy, right? Not always positive emotions. I forgot to make a disclaimer that I'm looking at all this from a positive psychology perspective. So I'm trying to make generalizations about how we can have people across the board, normal people, slightly more fulfilled, flourishing through some of their vacation experiences. And some of these might not really hold for certain groups and cultures and subcultures. But I think something that we can say that across the board matters is a lot of these hard times, on vacations also, some of these sufferings are really the ingredients that result in more meaningful and transformative experiences. I was hearing a colleague who did some interviews with people who studied abroad, and almost all of the experiences that were slightly on the meaningful side definitely had some challenge and negative emotions associated with it. And if we go to the relationship literature, if anyone on this panel is already doing that, would love to hear more about it so we can team up in this area. They do, like John Gottman and others, a lot look at these conflict management skills. So it's less about whether you have challenges or not, but it's more about how you deal with it that apparently makes a difference. So we can learn quite a lot there, I think, in the tourism literature. In the last year, I've stumbled upon this idea of playfulness, especially in adults. It's less popular or less commonly studied, and the mental mindset that you take to an experience, changing those fairly harder situations into more interesting, entertaining, stimulating instances, and that could make a difference. So I'm already imagining a study where we can measure how much playful people were, and as a state or a trait and how that affected the outcomes of vacations. That would be another interesting area of study. I have 3 more to share. Yes, communication. Very big, very nice. I know these days a lot of relationships are suffering because there's no time to talk. And I think we can all nicely argue that vacations do provide, hopefully, if we don't take our laptops and cell phones with us, a space and time where we can really connect on a deeper level, verbal, non-verbally. And you might have heard of this idea of bids in the literature. For example, me and my partner might be walking down a street in Amsterdam, and she might be pointing out to this building and be like, "Oh, hey, Moji, look at that, so cool." And at that moment, I can just ignore the comment. I can take a look and then continue with my distractions. That's another level of bidding, which is slightly better. I can make a sound and be like, and then continue. Or I can say, wow, check that out. Oh my God, look at that statue. Or let's imagine how many years this building has been sitting here. And so these things that I think when we have a slightly better or more mental space for it, I think vacations and tourism can provide an opportunity that we can really invest in communication quality before we head back home to our routine and daily life. All right. I know almost nothing about how personalities interact. I think it would be really, really cool to see, for example, if someone is open to new experiences and more on the extrovert side, and if the partner is willing to open up and step outside their comfort zone, and how that would affect their experience, but also how doing such things would feedback and gradually change people's personality over time. And the last thing that I think is very much interesting, but I, again, haven't looked much into, I keep hearing from colleagues here at the Experience Lab, for example, or some visiting scholars, that it's really also depends on the motivation, goals, values, as what people bring to these experiences and take away from them, which I have totally ignored in my previous research, and I think deserves some more attention. So these are some of the dynamics of shared tourism experiences that I think some of them we do have some evidence data, and some of them we know less about. And I would like to leave you all with one last question. I'm not going to try to answer this, but especially for people who are now more closely working with industry. If we know all about these, how can we now design for experiences that are just more inclusive of these love and connection experiences? And the love can be just love for your partner, but it can also be love with self and other visitors, even strangers you meet at a destination, love of nature, locals, or even a higher power that you might believe in. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Moji. It's very enlightening and very much down my alley. And if I may just make a couple of comments.
Yeah.
To regards to the last question, actually, apart from all the other points you've raised. Yes, the points you raised, particularly communication, is a big one, because without communication, we do not know what the other person wants, what they need, what they value, how they feel, where they're at. So we have to communicate, but people stop doing that, as I pointed out, particularly when it comes to intimate, difficult conversations that are being avoided. Now, as I already indicated to you, I actually am about to run workshops and offer retreats. And I call it mindful relational wisdom. And I call it an ABC of relational wisdom. And that integrates also the knowledge of what is love, what are relationships, what is intimacy. Now, that is just a normal kind of big overall love map, I call it, and it relates to, as you would be familiar with, to the Gottman's work. But it also extends into emotional intelligence as number B, And number C is an important aspect of communication. And the beauty, as you just highlighted, is actually within the context of travel. We are more open-minded, just like when we fall in love. You know, we just blossom, we just want to sponge up everything. Travel does that to us as well. Why not combine what you said, the experiences in travel, walking through the woods, feeling the sand between the toes, feeling the sunshine on your back, eating beautiful dinners in a beautiful cultural context, listening to music. All of these experiences can be beautifully integrated for learning about emotions, communication, sense of self. And that is the kind of concept that I'm offering. So I would love to talk to you further, and we could do mutual research along with that as well. Perhaps just my little comments. Hopefully we get some more comments later on. Delighted. Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure.
Well, with that introduction, what a stellar. Next one, if I may introduce, that aligns with that, because we'll talk about intimacy. And intimacy and love is a big topic for Dr. Xavier Matteucci. Now, he's been a presenter 2 years ago on a previous webinar that we had on intimacy and tourism. But however, he did not get much chance because we ran out of time somehow or other, didn't we? Now, I'd quickly introduce Xavier. He holds a PhD in tourism management from Vienna University, economics and business in Austria, in Vienna. He is an independent researcher, consultant, educator, and honorary professor specialized in tourism and leisure at the Fachhochschule Wien, University of Applied Sciences in Management and Communication. Now, Xavier is particularly interested in leisure and tourism's contribution to human flourishing and collective well-being. His latest work has focused on creative tourism as a means to expand on the notion of what we can learn about the relationships. So with further ado, there's so much to talk about again. Please, Xavier, go ahead and share your beautiful insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Birgit. Thank you for the introduction and for inviting me again. I will do as my previous, like the previous speaker, introduce my actually introduction to this topic. And you will see that actually I never planned to look at intimacy or love or relationships in the first place, because my PhD was about tourism experiences, but from another perspective, I looked at creative tourist experiences of flamenco as an art form, and through that research, I realized that a lot of the things that people are looking for, in fact, through different activities, whether that's flamenco or you know, having a nice meal out or whatever, is actually to you know, to bond or to connect with people. So I will talk about that now. And I excuse myself, I have a cough, so I'll try to drink a little bit along the way, so we can make this bearable. So I hope you can see my slides. And I will draw from Birgit's amazing work on intimacy, because I found a lot of inspiration through your work, Birgit. And I could not agree less than or more, sorry, with you when you said that what people might be looking for through travel actually is a particular connection with loved ones. And through my research in the last 10 years, whether that had to be with creative tourists or diaspora tourists or other kinds of tourists in different contexts, then actually this sense of connection with meaningful others came out, you know, pretty much always. So I do believe that what makes a good holiday experience is, in fact, the degree of intimacy that we experience with our companions. Again, whether these are friends or, you know, strangers or our, you know, relatives or partners. So intimacy is, in fact, a very complex and multidimensional concept. That's what Jameson wrote about in 1999. And there's been some work in tourism on intimacy specifically, and I can also relate to Lisa's work. on girlfriend getaways. Surprisingly, there's been lots of work on females and intimacy, but a lot less on males. So I think it would be nice to also study males traveling together and see how their relationship unfolds. I've done a little bit of this, although I was not targeting males particularly, but through interviews with friends, we found out that actually males also like to talk and share intimate stories and seek advice and open up to other males. So it's not something that only females do, as also you could find in the literature. So intimacy has been traditionally associated with the bonds that tie family members, relatives, romantic couples, and friends. But we've been moving away from that idea in the last years now to understand intimacy as a broader and more fluid concept that refers to specific interactions that bring people closer together. And if you look at the sociology of relationships, you will find increasingly that friends live together, that couples live or don't live together. In fact, that sometimes couple have casual sex with strangers, but they still live together. That even friends have casual sex together. So the nature of relationships has changed over the years, and now intimacy, of course, takes different shapes and forms. And I think that goes with this idea of postmodernity, where everything goes. It's getting more and more complex to understand, actually, or to differentiate concepts. So another thing which is worth mentioning is that intimacy could be seen as an overarching concept that relates to love, to friendship, also to sexual encounters and sexual relationships, and maybe to other contexts as well. So intimacy might be a connector, between all these different concepts that might be increasingly difficult to sort of to define today. So this picture is me and my daughter. I've got 3 kids, and this is one of my kids, and I decided to take her on a trip last Christmas, her alone, I mean with my partner, and not take my other boys, because I never get enough time to bond with my daughter or with my kids separately, because whenever I'm with them, I'm with the 3 of them, and I'm never with one of them at the same time. So I said, okay, let's take my daughter on a trip. So we went to the south of Spain, and my partner took that picture of us. So the bald little guy here is me, and my daughter is next to me. So again, this was for me a lived experience of bonding and connecting and spending quality time with my daughter for about 10 days, something that I don't do very often when I'm in Vienna. Okay, coming back to Birgit's work. See, I'm paying tribute to your work today. You wrote, Birgit, that intimacy relates to different things. We can understand intimacy as physical contact. Yeah, we'll see that with a few quotations, but also you can see that in what people will talk about sex. Not just sex, by the way. Yeah, intimacy could also experience in dancing with strangers on holiday, when for example, if you take not flamenco, but tango dance classes. So you can experience a sense of intimacy there. So intimacy could be experienced through verbal communication, through intimate talks, sharing stories, as you mentioned before, spiritual connections with others, and intellectual exchange. So through my work in different contexts, actually, I could see all of those dimensions of intimate experience, being present, and maybe the intellectual exchange and the spiritual connection might be less frequent, at least disclose less, but nevertheless they were there. So positive emotions. Moji talked about that already. It's a significant aspect of intimacy. And then positive emotions mostly with companions, but of course we can feel the same by interacting with the host population, with locals. Maybe less frequent. Again, depends on the type of travel that we engage in. But what is very important, I think, in intimacy is to look at the the conditions that lead to intimacy, but also the environmental conditions. So I wrote that intimacy or intimate socialities actually are produced by the social, spatial, and atmospheric qualities of some particular places where we actually, experience activities. So, yeah, and in that respect, there are different environments. Of course, I think there's no strict rule to this, but confined spaces might be conducive to experiencing intimacy, but also nature. And here I've got a quotation from a tourist that actually referred to an island where she spent some time with female friends, and she referred to this island as a small temple. So there's a spiritual dimension to this, and where she felt comfortable sharing experiences, and the space where she was staying was very small and basic in terms of comfort, and that also maybe led to some, to be more open to others, and the space was a bit hidden as well from other people, so you get this feeling of intimacy. And I think the space itself was conducive to to those moments of togetherness. So we should not neglect the environment in which we are. The other point which I wanted to exemplify is the the hospitality and the conviviality that is experienced in some particular spaces. And here we're looking at not the tourist spending quality time with other tourists, but a tourist spending quality time with a host, which doesn't happen very often in mainstream tourism. So the quote that you have here, the second one, is related to a creative tourists that participate in workshops at often the home of the service provider, of the artist, and because of that, the domestic sphere, tourists get to experience or get to meet other family members, and to taste the same food as the people prepare for themselves, and to hear their family stories or personal stories, and there is an exchange that is taking place because of the domestic sphere, because of the hospitality touch to the experience. And that's again not something that everybody can experience in mainstream tourism context. Another example here is something that Moji also talked about, is this intimacy through talks, where you disclose personal emotions, feelings, because of the holiday context, might be this liminoid, this exceptional, different, particular, peculiar environment which is not your everyday environment. So here this person talked about getting to know each other emotionally, talking about things that really matter, not just trivial things, but talk about yourself and how you feel and your life experiences, and how you maybe project yourself in the future. And this person talked about this, I just like falling in love, because you get to know your friends, your travel companions under a different light, and you may also get to know yourself differently, or understand yourself through those talks. So, and this is something that could unfold perhaps more easily in leisure and tourism context. So bringing people closer together. The last quotation that I wanted to share with you is again similar, but now from diaspora tourists going back to their homeland. And this quotation comes from people from Africa traveling, I mean, living in the UK, but traveling back to Africa where they're from. And they talk about intimacy as well. For instance, they talk about eating with their relatives or their friends from, you know, from when they were young, cooking, doing activities together, but within the domestic sphere again, talking a lot, telling our stories, remembering old stories and bring them up again, and laughing. And you talked about play before, playfulness, Moji before, and this is also something that came out of my research, not only with diaspora tourists, but also with creative tourists. And play and playfulness is important. It is connected to joy and is connected to feeling good and to opening up to others and to having a sense of togetherness. Yeah, this communitas concept from Victor Turner that's also relevant in our discussion. And I will finish with this to basically argue. I'm not sure whether you'll agree with me, but anyway, through my research with creative tourists, I've realized that actually intimacy, whether it is through sharing emotions and stories and being remote from our everyday life and so on and so forth, whether it's because we are doing nothing, idleness, with other people, so basically spending quality time, but dedicating time to people and not just to doing something. Sometimes that's what matters, and that's what we're missing most of the time, right? Is to engage with people and to be mindful, talk to them, listen to them, as Moji indicated when you were walking and really focusing on what your companion is telling you. So these shared moments of idleness and togetherness are not mainstream because we live on a very fast pace, and the fact that we are slowing down and which may not be desirable in many situations here, is a sign of resistance towards this fast pace of life, this consumerism, this conservative politics, even that's pushing us to produce and to consume. So intimacy takes a rebellious stance, in my view, through particular activities, and in creative tourism, I could see that. Ton Quitz did some great work with tango dancers, not tourism related, but he basically related to intimacy as an intense sense of being in relation. I could not agree more than that with him. With my own research, I found basically that, tourism spaces afford experiences of transitory, playful, collective intimacy that resemble the notion of heterotopia presented by Michel Foucault. Heterotopia is as a counter site, as a site of resistance, as a place where you enact an ideal social life. So idleness, bonding, maybe engaging in playful activities, transgressive behavior, even smoking weed, whatever, drinking, sex, and so on. Actually, all that contribute to intimacy, and I see that as a form of resistance to conservative politics, to fast-paced, busy modern lives, and so on. So this was my message. I hope that I haven't stretched it too long. And if you're interested in reading about some of the stuff that I've been talking about, then it's coming through this research here on this slide. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Xavier, for your presentation. And I did not realize that it would be part of that reference point to some extent, but thank you very much for that. Tango, just a little comment, very quick. It's not about the steps, as I was told by tango teacher. It's about the energy between the steps when you're blindfolded. With that in mind, let us go on to the next speaker, who will take a slightly different approach, again, and different perspectives, showing us what romance, sex, and relationships and intimacy, we just heard, is all about. It is Dr. Oscar V. Pinta. Now, Oscar holds a PhD in tourism from the University of Tasmania. He's a course coordinator, Masters of Tourism, Environment and Cultural Heritage, senior lecturer in tourism and society at the School of Social Sciences, Sociology and Criminology, the University of Tasmania, Australia. Oscar's field of research includes impacts of tourism, tourist behaviour and visitor experience, tourism management and marketing, sexualities and recreation, leisure and tourism geography. He is a leading expert on LGBTQI communities in the context of tourism, events, leisure and hospitality. His publications include Gay Tourism, New Perspectives, the Contemporary Role of Urban LGBTQI Festivals and Events, and Resisting Marginalisation and Reconstituting Space through LGBTQI Events. Oscar, if you would like to go ahead and share your beautiful thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Birgit, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to Moji and Xavier for their presentations as well. My presentation took a slightly different angle, and I'll be looking at Pride events, or the contemporary role of Pride events. And I believe that Pride events and festivals provide a vibrant and affirming environment where LGBTQI+ individuals can celebrate their identities quite openly, and kind of also fostering those opportunities for both romantic connections, but also for expressions of sexuality in a kind of supportive environment, supportive community. Also acknowledging that there are many countries around the world where homosexuality or any form of LGBTQI+ is still punishable, and I believe there are at least 9 countries in the world where LGBTQI+ people can be executed simply for being for who they are. So thank you so much for providing me this platform to speak on this topic. Now, my presentation mainly will focus on these 2 recent publications that I had, or semi-recent in academic terms. So if you would like to download those later on, you're more than welcome. If you don't have access to those, please email me and I'll be able to provide you with a copy of those and as well. So I guess just to begin very broadly as to what is LGBTQI+ tourism, and yes, there are researchers who do quite a bit of research on LGBTQI+ tourism. In particular, in the last 5 to 7 years, there was a proliferation of research in this area, but overall it relates to the development and marketing of tourism products and services to lesbian, bisexual, transgender, gay, queer, questioning, intersex, and other people. Now, those are the particular products that are targeting LGBTQI population. So if you are part of LGBTQI+ population and you travel, it doesn't mean that you necessarily engage in LGBTQI+ tourism, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a consumption of that product, and sometimes it can be partial consumption, right? So people might be traveling to a particular destination with, for example, culture and music in mind, but they, on the sidelines, they might engage in other activities that are particular to LGBTQI+ community. Now, to understand LGBTQI+ tourism or in leisure in general, we need to talk about gay space. And then something what my actually PhD back in the day was all about was exploring that notion of gay space and then placing it within the neo-tribal kind of theory as well, or Turner's communitas in a way relates to that as well. So I really like this quote by Hindle, who describes gay space as a physical manifestation of gay community, I would just correct him on the term community, because for me, LGBTQI plus communities or gay communities would be more appropriate term, because community implies singularity, that people are all the same and like the same things, whereas communities just denotes that there are far more identities within that acronym, and they all have different needs and wants and so on and so forth. So gay space can be understood as a safe haven where people can share a sense of belonging and solidarity. And it's also a platform for various services to emerge there as well. In leisure terms, in tourism terms, in event terms, and so on and so forth. So there are many businesses that are promoting themselves as gay friendly. In fact, there are many destinations that promote themselves as gay friendly. Many destinations develop campaigns around it. In fact, Tasmania in Australia is the only state that has a rainbow accreditation for tourism businesses. I believe there's some in the making in other states and territories, but Tasmania at the moment is the only one. And that basically makes businesses accountable to providing inclusive environment to the LGBTQI plus clientele. And usually the research suggests that gay people or people part of that community travel to places that allow them to feel comfortable and they are able to express their sexual identity. So there's a few studies done on risk. And one of the reasons why, say, gay couples in particular don't travel to countries with a bad human rights records is basically because they can't express their intimacy in public. It doesn't mean that they will be making out on streets and and all of that, but it's just they don't want to be looked at as if they were at the museum exposition kind of situation. And usually, if we talk about tourism, the most popular forms of tourism for LGBTQ plus tourists would be city breaks. So it would be cities in Europe, usually like Berlin, Barcelona, or Sydney, for example, in Australia, but also resort towns that's specifically cater to LGBTQ plus clientele. And usually those are historic, it has historic roots to it. So they're well-established LGBTQ plus resort towns or destinations. So such as Sitges, for example, in Barcelona, Key West, Fire Island, Mykonos, and so on and so forth. Now, just wanted to talk a little bit before I jump into the Pride festivals and a specific study that I wanted to present to you today. Just wanted to cover the LGBTQ plus travel motivations. And there I have this note that I kind of alluded to already, whereby travel motivations within the LGBTQ plus acronym might significantly differ. So, for example, the study by Thekkelson indicated that, for example, lesbian travel motivations would be completely different from those of gay men, for example. Or if gay couples, whether they are lesbian couple or whether they are gay men couple, have children, it shows that their travel motivations rarely actually differ from those of heterosexual families as well. So the motivations actually are quite the same. Now, some very early research suggests or grouped gay travel motivations into 3 clusters. So the first one being gay social life and sex, which is topical, I guess, for today's topic as well. Culture and sites, and comfort and relaxation. I would argue that besides the word gay in the first category there, I would argue that they would be probably very similar categories for those heterosexual people traveling as well. So I don't think this is something of a very wow kind of finding. So I think we are all human and we all have very similar motivations and why we travel. Now, there's also research indicating that there is this desire to engage in social interactions and self-exploration as well. My own PhD showed, I looked at the LGBTQI+ resorts and why people travel to LGBTQI+ only resorts or gay only resorts, is that desire for social interaction with other LGBTQI+ people. People were, so they could be actually in amongst the people where they can relax and not think about, you know, whether other people are gay or second guessing and all of that. And also self-exploration. Also a desire to get away from a day-to-day routines, and also self-fulfillment and well-being. Some of the later research suggests that there as well. All right, well, let's go into the Pride festivals and events. I find Pride festivals events in particular very fascinating because they all started as kind of a protest, both, you know, in US and Australia. It was the festivals predate the laws that actually allowed same-sex intercourse, for example, and same-sex relationships in general. So therefore, they are a protest. In very early days, those Pride events would not be able to attract any funding. It would be very kind of makeshift, very grassroots, lots of volunteer work and so on and so forth. And now we see that many destinations around the world are indeed investing into those Pride events because they really see it as a kind of attraction to attract tourists to those destinations, which is the example, as I'll show later on in the results section of Sydney, right? So Pride festivals are really platforms to provide LGBTQI+ communities with a visual representation to celebrate their identities, and also showcase the political achievements and serve as a form of self-acceptance as well. So there's quite a bit of research on that. And now, as those events, Pride events, have been going for many years, there have been lots of societal and political changes. Obviously, the role of those festivals has also changed. So it shifted a little bit from being purely a protest to more of a celebration, more of a, you know, show off and stuff like that. Not saying that it's still not a protest, and indeed it is, but it did change indeed. And for this particular study, I looked at two events in Australia. So Australia is known for two events. One of them being Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras, and the other one Melbourne Midsummer Festival. So two festivals there. And the main research question for this was what role urban LGBTQI+ festivals and events are designed to play in contemporary Australia. So this, a lot of people find the word urban curious, and the reason why I had to separate this, because recently there has been a lot of LGBTQI+ events popping around regional areas, not just in Australia, but also in Europe, USA, Argentina, and elsewhere in the world. There has been even a Pride event in Antarctica, which I found fascinating as well. So two events, Sydney Mardi Gras, which is the older one. So that was the first one was in 1978, and Midsummer Festival, which is it started in 1989. I think Taylor Swift will like that. All right. Right, so the method for my study, so this was during the COVID years when we couldn't talk face to face. So thematic textual analysis was a great way to do research. And what I did was look at the annual reports of these two events. And these textual documents kind of socially construct various nations of particular phenomena. So they capture those realities, those moments from year to year. And specifically, I looked at the decade between 2010 and 2019, inclusive. The reason why I used them was because they kind of were appropriate forms because it represented a direct communication from event organizers. Obviously, they were also showcasing and it's one of limitations, they showcase what they want to show. So, you know, they kind of curate that kind of opinion a little bit. And to capture the social change elements within annual reports, I have these constants there. So we looked at the main aim of each year's events, the social outcomes of the event each year, marketing of the event each year, and mentions of marriage equality, because marriage equality was not possible in Australia until 2017, if I'm not wrong. So quite a lot of early reports were talking about marriage equality being at the center of what the demands were, if you want. Whereas post-marriage equality vote, there was a little bit of unclarity of what the main motivation was, and more recently it became about trans rights. So just very quickly to show what themes came up with. So mainstreaming LGBT events as tourist attractions, supporting LGBTQI+ communities, challenging the political and social status quo, encouraging the visibility and education often about LGBTQI+ culture, and addressing intersectionality and including other marginalized groups. So very quickly into those, and then I'll finish the presentation. So the first one being mainstreaming LGBTQI+ events as tourist attractions. So, which I already kind of alluded, now just before I go, those things in italics are the quotes, the direct text from the actual annual reports of what they talk about and kind of attributed to that particular theme. So, as I mentioned before, contrary to the historic purpose and meaning of Pride events, today LGBTQI+ event organizers tend to celebrate the inclusiveness and diversity of their city rather than purely protesting and demanding rights, right? However, that caused a bit of a tension between those who value the historic foundations, because a lot of those people that participated in 1978, for example, in Sydney, are still obviously alive, and they have that living memory of how harsh it was, in particular when police beatings were involved, and it's quite controversial still until today around the topic of police participating in Sydney Mardi Gras. But also those who welcome the modern transformation of Pride events as well. So there's that dichotomy still. Next theme was the supporting of LGBTQI+ communities. So obviously that remains the main I guess aim of those events.
Can I, Oscar, can I just quickly wonder how long your presentation will go on for? We're just a bit concerned about the rest of the presentations. It's very exciting, but I think we might have to conclude it. Thank you.
A few more slides, sorry. Okay, I'll just jump through this. Challenging the status quo, so just a few quotes there for you in terms of the marriage equality, what I mentioned before in particular. that there was kind of a loss of as to what the course for these both particular events would be. And the really interesting one that myself and my colleague found is this LGBTQI plus community encompassing other marginalized groups who are not necessarily part of the LGBTQI plus community, but they are the advocates for the rights of other marginalized groups. So LGBTQI plus, for example, migrants and refugees, as well as Indigenous people in Australia. So I will conclude there then. Thank you so much. I can talk, as you can see, more and more about this, but I'll stay here online for a bit longer so I can answer any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oscar, and my apologies for just looking at the time a little bit. Again, it leads connected beautifully to creative spaces and intimacy and spaces that was talked about before. Now I'll take your presentation straight into the next one, which has, again, a slightly different angle again. And the speaker will be Dr. Julia Meszaros, if I say it correctly. Now, Julia holds a PhD in Global Sociocultural Studies, Florida International University, USA. She's a social professor and graduate coordinator for sociology and criminal justice, AM University Commerce, Dallas, Texas, USA. Now, Julia's research interest revolves around globalization, gender, masculinity, and sexuality, with publications that address the commodification of intimacy and sexuality, and race and space and agency in the international introduction industry. She's completing a book about the mail order bride industry, to my understanding. Her publications include Commodification of Intimacy and Sexuality and American Men and Romance, Tourism, Searching for Traditional Trophy Wives as Status Symbols of Class Privilege. Now, again, if we may ask you, Julia, go ahead and share your beautiful insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Birgit, and the invite to speak today. Let me share my screen with you all. I don't know where this went. 1 second. Okay. There we are. I'm not sure. 1 second. Sorry, everyone. Why is this not? Okay. Can you all see the presentation? No, it's my. I'm so sorry. 1 second. There it is. Okay. Can everyone see now? Yes. Okay, great. So this is a quick introduction to international dating, or what is commonly referred to as the mail order bride business. I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the mail order bride business. It started originally in the 1970s, largely in Asia, mostly in the Philippines, with catalogs with people's photos and internets, and not internet addresses, excuse me, physical addresses. And they started as pen pal correspondence kind of connections. And then during the 1990s, with the rise of the internet and the fall of the Soviet Union, the industry moved online and it expanded into the former Soviet Union area, mainly Russia and Ukraine. And then we also see the development of romance tours. So a lot of these companies, not only do they facilitate correspondence, but they also facilitate group romance tours or individual romance tours. And so this is one aspect of international dating that is explicitly marriage focused, and that is how they kind of differentiate themselves from sex tourism. So main concern about this industry is it human trafficking? And in the late 1990s, there were 2 high-profile murders in the state of Washington. A bride from the Philippines and a bride from Kyrgyzstan were both murdered by their American husbands who had sponsored their K-1 fiancé visas. Because of that, there was a move to regulate the industry. And in 2005, a law called the International Marriage Broker Regulation Act was passed with bipartisan support and signed into law by George Bush Jr. And it was part of a reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. It essentially limits men to applying for 2 K-1 fiancé visas in a lifetime. It requires agencies to do background checks on the men in sex offender databases and in regular just criminal database checks. They also are supposed to provide resources about social services available in the US in the bride's language. And the law defines international marriage brokers as companies that charge men but not women to participate. So an example, Match.com would not fall under the purview of this law because both parties have to pay to participate. All right, so how has IMBRA impacted the industry? So originally the industry was semi against this law because they used to actually sell people's physical addresses. However, looking back now, I've spoken to a lot of people who were in the industry in the 90s, and they realized that actually it was pretty wild that they sold women's physical addresses, and luckily that nothing too crazy ever happened, and that actually it was kind of a safety risk. So this law actually helps the industry in some ways because it, allows them to vet the men, and they have to conduct their correspondence through the actual website, which allows them to keep that correspondence monetized and allows them to make more money. So it has helped the industry in many ways as well. Some recent developments on TikTok, there has been a phenomenon called passport bros that has recently blown up. Where men from the US, typically Black men, are going to Colombia, the Dominican Republic, or the Philippines, and they are just using dating apps versus actual private for-profit agencies like the ones I studied, where there's no vetting on either side, right? So that often can lead to some violence or other bad things. 8 US citizens have been murdered in Medellin in the last month of 2023. And some of them, how it happened was they met up with a woman on a dating app and were targeted to be robbed and then murdered. And so vetting is an important component of what these agencies do. Also, the war in Ukraine has changed the face of the industry in Eastern Europe. For a long time during my research, Ukraine, a lot of Ukrainian women were uninterested in actually leaving Ukraine because life was okay. And now there are these political and life crises where it's much easier to meet these people during unstable times. People are much more likely to want to leave their home countries. And many women have already left to the EU as refugees. And so this is one way that they can kind of stay permanently. A number of agencies have actually shut down during this time. So local matchmakers who are on the ground continue the business online. And some guys are still willing to travel there and you work with these private matchmakers. But most of the foreigners who tried to start agencies in Ukraine have shut their businesses down. All right, so my research methods, all the agencies I studied are IMBRA compliant. I began in 2010. I followed 3 romance tours from an American-based agency called A Foreign Affair in Colombia, Ukraine, and the Philippines. They were the most popular tour sites in their respective regions. I looked at other agencies such as Dream Connections and Match Guarantee that were largely based in Ukraine and have now since shut down. Also looked at boutique matchmaking agencies in Ukraine, like For Him Dating, It's Possible, and Prime Matchmaking, and then also talked to affiliate marketing sites and the people who ran them. And I also interviewed a lot of the guys who participate. So the masculinity. So the men involved tended to be politically conservative. They tended to espouse traditional gender roles, and that's what they were seeking in their relationships. They wanted heteronormative families. They tended to be mostly white. A lot of them were divorced. Most of them tended to be from the boomer generation. The median age was about 53. And for the younger guys participating, there was a lot of undertones of this kind of incel, podcast bro, Andrew Tate subculture going on. So men's search for the relationships in quote unquote poorer countries can be exploitative. In my larger book, I argue that they're really looking for women's labor and traditional feminized labor, which has been what marriage has historically been about, women providing men labor in exchange for stability. It can be potentially abusive. I did have one situation of a Ukrainian woman who had worked for AFA as a translator in Ukraine. She married an American guy, and he was financially and verbally abusive, not physically abusive, but if they would get in an argument, he would shut off her vehicle, he would turn off her credit card so that she would have to kind of deal with him. She ended up getting divorced from him, and he ended up actually dying because he was making basement Botox and died from a bad batch of his own Botox. So interesting sidebar. So the men often thought that this industry could potentially lead to these scams, right? Because 90% of online dating, of this, international dating is actually online. Even the agencies call most of these guys keyboard Romeos. The correspondence online is monetized. Increasingly, we are seeing the use of chatbots and AI as a way of being part of this industry. For example, it's $8 to send an email and $8 to receive the response. So each time you send a correspondence and receive one back, it's $16. It's more if you add photos. And in the ultimate scheme, a lot of men are very happy with the fantasy versus the reality of these relationships. They're happy with having an online fantasy, beautiful woman in a different country. Ultimately, these are part of larger intimate migrations, I would say. So there's an overlap in men that are searching for women's intimate labor. So we have the guys I studied, romance tourists, and they often sometimes overlap with sex tourists. So some of the guys I met were looking for serious relationships, but while they were there, they also engaged in sex tourism. And there was also a lot of men who were interested in retiring in these countries. And so I also met a lot of guys who were these romance retiree migrants who would move to the Philippines and try to find a much younger wife, not necessarily through an agency, but so all of these three things kind of overlap, these three different strands of men looking for women's intimate labor. And they all tend to go to similar geographic spaces where these men have relative affluence in comparison to local populations. There's a high availability of women's labor and the cost of living is low. And so this is one example of a new form of imperial reach, a type of, geographic and intimate arbitrage and gentrification. And in one way, it can be a form of exploiting vulnerable populations. All right, so some conclusions. There are a lot of complex issues surrounding the ethics and regulations of the international and dating industry that are there to prevent exploitation. And we're hoping to encourage intercultural exchange, but be aware that there are these opportunities for exploitation. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you, Julia, for your completely different perspectives again. I think just a quick summary, what you highlighted really is a complexity of not just romance tourism or sex tourism, which was discussed as a opposite end of the spectrum, but the intermingling of all these complexities that need to be addressed and considered when we talk about romance tourism. Most people think automatically wedding tourism, honeymoon tourism, or sweet walking along the beach. There's more to it, isn't there? So thank you very much for that presentation. This leads us beautifully into the speaker of another context of sex tourism research extensively, which is Dr. Lisa Beresi. Now, Lisa has a PhD in Health and Human Performance from the University of Florida, USA. She's Associate Professor for Recreation, Sport and Tourism, Associate Professor for Program in Jewish Culture and Society, and also Associate Professor Healthcare Engineering Systems Center. Lisa's research revolves at the nexus of health, sexual health, positive sexuality, and well-being, adopting a gender-sensitive and life course-grounded approach. She investigates sexual behavior, attitudes, risk-taking, and sexual education needs among young and older adults in various leisure and tourism contexts. Lisa recently co-edited a special issue on innovation and impact of sex as leisure in research and practice in leisure sciences, and the book entitled Sex in Tourism, Exploring the Light and the Dark. Now, that is basically what we've been starting to look at throughout this particular webinar. So if I can hand over to you, Lisa, please go ahead and share your insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, Birgit, for this introduction. And thank you and Rada both for organizing this wonderful event. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you to the audience for attending this presentation. Just give me a second to share. Can you see my slides? Wonderful, thank you. So the focus of this brief expose today is on offering a holistic understanding of sex and tourism using the socio-ecological model. Sex is an integral part of various tourism experiences, as virtually all of the speakers explained today. Tourism is characterized by the primacy of enjoyment and often involves sexual expression. Nevertheless, relative to the central roles that sex plays within tourism, it is an understudied area of research. And existing literature tends to focus on commercial sex tourism to the exclusion of other forms of sexual expression. However, the links between sex and tourism cannot and should not be reduced to commercial trade. Various tourism experiences offer a liberatory, contra-normative social reality that is characterized by that sense of anonymity, liminality or liminoidity, heterotopia, communitas, and the sense of situational disinhibition, that sense of being out of space, out of time, and out of mind. This situation encourages often both commercial and non-commercial sexual exploration, transgression, and risk-taking in both steady relationships, talking about couples here, and casual sexual relationships. And none of these are adequately captured by sex tourism conceptualizations. Thus, the field needs a more flexible, encompassing, and comprehensive approach. To contextualize the socio-ecological sex and tourism model that I will present in a moment, within the existing body of knowledge of the nexus on sex and tourism, it is important to compare and contrast some existing approaches. The literature presents overlapping and often stereotypical conceptualizations, including sex tourism and romance tourism, with different connotations based on the involved sexual scripts, actors, and power relations and imbalances. Sex tourism is the most common, which is often simplistically defined as sex for money in tourism contexts, while sex tourists are construed as travelers with the main motivation to consume sexual services at the destination. Now, clearly, this conceptualization obscures a lot of complexity. It also disregards the diversity of sex workers and their clients and ignores the ambiguous elements of gender relations, recreation opportunities, consumption, power differentials, exploitation, migration, marriage, and the list goes on. More nuanced approaches actually do encompass multiple parameters for defining sex tourism, including voluntary versus coerced or forced participation, and the levels of commerciality involved in the sexual encounter. Another example includes the role of sex as a purpose of travel, the positive versus negative nature of the sexual encounter, and the role of the tourism industry as a facilitator of sexual encounters. Yet another more nuanced conceptualization of sex tourism looks at the intention to engage in commercial sex as a motivation for travel, the nature of the financial exchange, the amount of time spent with the sex worker, the nature of the sexual encounter itself, and whether the sex seeker or sex provider or both travel. While these approaches offer some analytical flexibility, there is no consensus as to whether female tourists having sex with local men should be included and framed as sex tourists. Some scholars argue that these relationships are often based on romance and emotional involvement, and therefore these women should be construed as romance tourists rather than sex tourists. The romance tourism concept garnered controversy, a lot of it actually, and spurred the debate regarding the differences and similarities between the gendered versions of female romance tourism and male sex tourism. Focusing on the differences in gendered power relations, contexts, and outcomes of sexual encounters in tourism, many feminist researchers resist the inclusion of women in the ranks of sex tourism. Conversely, focusing on the similarities in economic, class, and racial privileges of Western sex and romance tourists compared to their local sexual partners, researchers problematize such distinction as essentialist and uncritical. Indeed, the assumption that all women are interested while all men are uninterested in romance in their sexual encounters is erroneous and very simplistic. Moreover, the distinction is questionable because it implies that sex and romance are two distinct, maybe even dichotomous constructs, which is not always the case. Hence, the distinction between female romance tourism and male sex tourism introduces oversimplifications and overgeneralizations and reproduces detrimental gender stereotypes when it comes to sexual behavior and sexual double standards. Research focus on sex and romance tourism contributes important insights. However, it downplays the frequency, diversity, and importance of sexual behavior among tourists and between tourists and locals, devoid of commercial exchange. While research addressing the ramifications of commercial sex tourism is clearly valuable and important, it is crucial not to lose sight of consensual sexual expression and pleasure associated with non-commercial sex in tourism. Neglecting to grasp the roles of pleasure at the nexus of sex and tourism actually means failing to comprehend the roles of sex in tourism and vice versa. The socio-ecological sex and tourism model that I'm proposing here addresses these weaknesses and offers a useful analytical prism for future analysis of the diversity and complexity of sexual expression in tourism. The socio-ecological sex and tourism model actually encompasses both commercial and non-commercial sexual behavior, and it analyzes a continuum of diverse positive and negative manifestations and consequences of sexual expression in tourism among tourists and locals and among tourists themselves. Hence, the model serves as an umbrella lens for understanding both the light side of the continuum that includes safe, respectful, and mutually pleasurable sexual interaction between consenting adults of various sexual identities with or without financial transaction. It also encompasses the darker side of the continuum, focusing on the manifestations of heinous sexual exploitation, which include child sex tourism and human trafficking. And it also encompasses a plethora of other sexual encounters, such as risky sexual behaviors, non-forced prostitution, sexual harassment, that could be located alongside the presented continuum. The social ecological sex and tourism model also makes room for consideration of the unique tourism social atmosphere, characterized by that anonymity, liminoidity, heterotopia communitas, and it also offers complex interpretations of sexual behaviors and meanings. Now, importantly, the model analyzes the multi-level impacts and ripple effects of sex in tourism throughout the individual, interpersonal, community, societal, and global socio-ecological levels that are presented currently on the slide. The individual level includes knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, biological factors, and personal history affecting sexual behavior. The interpersonal socio-ecological level includes the relationships between the sexual or romantic partners, including both tourists and locals, and their immediate social networks. The community social ecological level includes the resources and characteristics of the community receiving tourists that might affect or be affected by sex in tourism. The societal or country social ecological level includes destination image, sexual norms, sexual rights, and the ways they are reflected in laws, policies, and healthcare services. And finally, the global socio-ecological level includes international relationships and organizations, politics, advocacy, legal issues, economics, and technological advances relevant to sexual behavior. Now, let me present the socio-ecological model and its implementation to the light and dark continuum in a step-by-step manner, starting with the individual level. At the individual level of sex and tourism, we can find pleasure, expression, increased skills, and sexual well-being on the light side of the continuum, as well as fear, humiliation, and powerlessness on the dark side of that continuum. At the interpersonal level of sex and tourism, on the light side, we can find fulfilling and safe sexual relationships for everyone involved, but also sexual encounters characterized by severe power imbalances, exploitation, and victimization on the dark side. At the community level, sex and tourism can have positive influence by raising awareness of sexual issues and contributing to improved local services, programs, and policies. Nevertheless, it can also exacerbate illegal prostitution, crime, community degradation, and locals' hostility towards tourists engaging in these practices. At the societal or country level, on the light side of sex and tourism, we can find contributions to equal sexual rights, progressive legal and policy reforms, and cosmopolitan destination image. However, the dark side presents corruption, reproduction of power imbalances, discriminatory laws, and the world's brothel destination image. Lastly, on the light side of the global level, we can find an establishment of the international sexual rights advocacy organizations, an improvement in the tourism industry corporate responsibility. The dark side, however, propagates the global proliferation of the child sex economy and transnational human trafficking, and contributes to the global spread of sexually transmitted infections. Future analysis using the socio-ecological model of sex and tourism should be cognizant of the fact that the impacts of sexual encounters cut across these socio-ecological levels. Namely, individual and interpersonal sexual dynamics cannot be disentangled from each other. It would be quite simplistic. Furthermore, the micro-level impacts accrue and produce ripple effects at the aggregated levels of community, country, society, and global arenas. In turn, laws, policies, norms, and demand and supply factors from the macro levels create conditions that inhibit or facilitate various kinds of sexual behavior at the micro levels. Now, this model is flexible and should creatively mesh with other context-specific concepts and models depending on the analyzed sexual matter. The nuanced holistic approach will enrich the future analysis of sexual issues in tourism, thereby contributing to tourism knowledge and enabling the tourism industry to manage and plan in relation to sex and sexual. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to downsize severely the case study of implementing the socio-ecological approach, and I will have to cherry pick and hop around. However, please reach out to me if you're interested, and I will happily share the publications that underpin this presentation. So the brief case study of applying the socio-ecological model that I wanted to share with you is actually focusing on developing sexual health education in tourism. Now, sexual health education for tourists should provide essential knowledge and skills promoting safer, rewarding experiences while accounting for the uniqueness of the targeted tourism environment and the socio-demographic and psychological profiles. Currently on the slide, I'm presenting another model that was developed showing how the socio-ecological approach meshes very nicely with other frameworks from public health and health communications. Given the focus of this presentation, again, please bear with me. I'm going to skip the public health side of this model, but I am going to focus on the ecosystem approach, illustrating the value of the socio-ecological model in this case. Developing effective sexual health education for tourists is an essential yet challenging and a long overdue task. Despite the scope and the consequences of sexual risk-taking in tourism, sexual health education options for tourists are unsatisfactory, scarce, poorly understood, and severely under-researched. The erroneous perceptions of sexual health education for tourists as unfeasible, impractical, or unnecessary might explain their low profile and limited availability. Several of my studies, however, show that although sexual health education efforts targeting tourists are rare or virtually non-existent, many people welcome the idea of developing tourism-focused sexual health education, but they frequently ask, well, who would do that? Who's responsible for that? And this is where the socio-ecological model can help us with identifying the relevant stakeholders who could contribute or could be considered while developing this effort, or maybe even held responsible for developing sexual health education for tourists. So at the individual level, it is important to identify high-risk groups among tourists and locals based on the individual sexual health needs, profiles, and sexual relationships. At the institutional level, relevant healthcare agencies, higher education institutions, non-profit organizations, and commercial sector, mainly tourism and hospitality industry, in both tourist sending and tourist receiving countries, should join forces to contribute to the development and delivery of comprehensive sexual health education for tourists. Specifically, they should provide intellectual expertise, funding, staff, and essential infrastructure for intercepting high-risk groups among tourists and locals before the encounter, during the encounter, and after the encounter upon returning home. These stakeholders should also explore innovative technologies for the delivery and evaluation of the educational efforts. They should also create feedback loops for individuals and communities to help determine the effectiveness of sexual health education. Including communities is also key to give them voice, promote balanced leadership, and encourage diversity and foster participatory grassroots action. Also, local, state, national, and international governmental authorities should provide laws and public policies nurturing social and corporate responsibility over tourists and locals' sexual health and well-being, and facilitating the development and delivery of sexual health education. Global organizations are also responsible for working on international relationships, politics, advocacy, economics, and technological advances focused on sexual health in tourism. Lastly, all stakeholders are responsible for developing an awareness of the public health consequences of sexual risk-taking in tourism and the socioeconomic benefits of sexual health education tailored to tourist needs. Further research is, of course, essential to develop effective sexual health interventions for tourists, to inform their risk perceptions, and to improve knowledge and skills. To this end, future studies should continue examining the sexual health education for tourists model and the socio-ecological approach to the development and the delivery of such education. Thank you so much again for listening. Your comments and questions are most welcome when Birgit allows for it at the end. And if you're interested, please contact me. My email appears on the screen, lisabk@illinois.edu. I'm happy to share publications, have further dialogue and deliberations and collaborations on these and other related topics. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Very, very comprehensive and addressing a lot of the issues that were sort of alluded to by the previous speakers. And that socio-ecological model, I think, sums it up beautifully as to the need of education. And here we're talking about sexual education, but possibly Moji and other people also allude to other kinds of education, which is relationship education. that expands or includes sexual education. And it is intimacy education, perhaps, that we should be talking about rather than just sexual education. People don't know what intimacy is all about. That's correct. Anyway, with that, we have one more presentation. It's such a rich webinar today, and we might go a little bit over time. But hey, Riza, are we ready to possibly play the video by Eva at all?
Yes, if you think that's good. So
I quickly introduce it while you sort of set that up. Eva Stanchiketa has a PhD in Cultural and Literary Gerontology, University of Lleida, Spain. She's a postdoctoral researcher and lecturer at the Department of Humanities Pompey Fabra in Barcelona, Spain. Eva, she is currently actually postdoc in English literature lecturer, and her interests and areas of interest are academic focus of include literature and cultural representations of aging, medical humanities, dementia and care, age-friendly higher education, travel writing, and leisure tourism. Her publications include Venetian travel narratives in Erica Jong's work, Baby Boomers Hitting the Road, The Paradoxes of Senior Leisure Tourism, and On the Hunt for Noble Savages, Romance Tourism and Aging Femininities. So again, slightly different perspective, but
So hello everyone, my name is Eva Stanchiketa and I'm very, very excited to be here. Thank you also very much to Birgit and Teresa for making this event happen. Thank you for organizing. Thank you for all the work that you've done to make this happen today. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you today because I'm now participating while you're having this wonderful event in a Nordic Congress of Gerontology. So therefore, I'm recording this video, and hopefully that after all these interesting discussions, perhaps we can continue discussing some of the aspects that you explored today in this event. And in today's this very short presentation, I would like to draw your attention to some of the critical insights of this complex interplay between successful aging and sexual relationships of older tourists, of older travelers. And I would like to argue that this so-called romance tourism actually has both positive and negative implications for women's physical and psychological health and a sense of well-being. And why I've decided to focus on this topic in particular? Well, because casual sexual encounters in leisure tourism has received quite a lot of attention in both theoretical and empirical work, and some of the presenters today, like Liz Berdichevsky and others, have explored, have written a lot about this. However, this complex relationship between romance tourism and female aging remains largely underrepresented. And of course, there are many reasons behind it, but one of the most important ones, I would say, that aging, and especially more humanistic aspects of aging and also cultural gerontology, is still is not quite present yet in gerontological, more traditional scholarship and also age studies. So it is a field that is still emerging slowly, but gaining more and more presence and visibility in these scholarships. And also there is a little bit kind of a lack of qualitative studies and more person-centered perspectives, and especially more insider views of all the tourist experiences, in this case, more intimate experiences when we are away from home. And also, I would say another aspect is that there is kind of lack of communication and interaction between scholars working in different fields. In this case would be like gerontological studies or age studies, and also tourism industry in general. But luckily, and I can see that there is more and more research bridging these different studies together, and hopefully in the near future we're going to have a more interdisciplinary, more holistic perspective of different phenomena in these and connecting fields of study. So as we know, holiday is often regarded as this great opportunity to let go. We have this sense of freedom that actually is sometimes absent when we are at home, and also we are less constrained by routines, by social roles, and we can kind of, enjoy our time. And sometimes this ludic nature of leisure tourism might also prompt people to act in ways that are not very usual in their everyday lives, and also perhaps these ways might be more contradictory to these regular social norms in their home country. And this appeal to sex and sexuality has often been used by the tourism industry to develop and to promote and to foster these more attractive aspects of travel destination. This topic has been explored by so many researchers, again, the researchers that are present today. And I would like to quote from Hart and Hawks, who say that, and I quote, "Together with travel, sex is one of the world's most common forms of pleasure. Not infrequently, the two activities coincide." And also we have this idea of a forced sex, right? So this inclusion of sex among other elements such as sun, sea, and sand also shows that sexual experiences, sexual pleasure is often kind of an integral part of the overall tourism experience. So although sexual encounters and sexual adventures are an important aspect in international traveling and especially leisure tourism, there are many gaps and contradictions that need further investigation. And as Beresi and colleagues have stated, and I would like to quote, "Sex as leisure is a novel and potentially uncomfortable idea to the researchers and practitioners, as well as to the general public." So scholars are studying sexuality, studying more intimate aspects of human being, are very often ostracized, and sometimes their work is not taken very seriously and perceived perhaps as less legitimate. And also, especially, there is very little attention still given to these casual sexual encounters, these kind of more emotional and intimate rendezvous in later life, especially among older women. And why do I focus on older women? Well, because there are many reasons. First of all, aging women's sexual traveling is almost invisible in sex-related tourism in comparison to tourism that explores sexual encounters of men, and especially older men, because we have a lot of these typical sex destinations, where older men go because they have resources, they have time, perhaps now we're enjoying this retirement stage of life. So we have the resources and we have a time to do and engage in this kind of tourism. Also, older women are more subject to these negative notions of aging, and very often because of these stereotypes perceived as asexual, as deformed, as sagging, as unappealing, which makes them much more vulnerable and unseen and unvoiced and sometimes even ridiculed. And for example, let's take gray hair, right? We have the figure of George Clooney, Salt and Pepper. So, this kind of, grayish hair is like a element or a symbol of, appeal, sexual appeal, of attractiveness. In comparison to gray hair women, that would be like, a symbol of being a grandmother. So it's like one of the many examples, right, that women, because of their aging, are much more ostracized and marginalized, especially in relation to sexual appeal and to sexuality. And also, since women live longer, even if the gap is a little bit closing now, but very, very slowly, they are also much more likely to experience discrimination based on ageism, and also they are much more economically disadvantaged because sometimes their pensions are much lower than men's pensions and older men's pensions, and also more socially excluded and marginalized, among many other aspects that also come into play. However, the studies show that those who look for romantic experiences and romance are mainly middle-aged or older women who very often have a slower self-esteem or have experienced some failed relationships in their previous experiences. However, if they have been provided with sexual pleasures, if they have been treated in very nice and respectable ways, if they have been made feel desirable and attractive, they are much more likely to return to the same travel destination in search to the same kind of fulfillment and emotional intimacy, and also to fulfill their fantasies, which very often are absent at home in their home countries. So, but why is this focus on sexuality and sexuality? Why do you give so much importance to sexuality in life, and especially more and more focus of sexuality among older people? Why do we see it as one of the ways that can help us, for example, to improve our quality of life, to improve our sense of well-being? Well, one of the reasons is this discourse of successful aging, or if you like, active and healthy aging, that emerged in the US in the second half of the 20th century, more or less. And the primary aim of this successful aging discourse or model was to erase or to replace, if you like, these negative constructions of old age as a stage that is marked by, for example, loss or frailty or decay, and instead to focus and to highlight these like more positive aspects of growing older, such as active lifestyles, anti-aging ideals, consumerism, and this kind of healthy, happy living and later life. And sexual functioning, and especially its optimization, has been given a special focus within this discourse. Sexual activity and being sexual active has become kind of like a sign of or an indicator of one's overall physical and mental well-being, and also a sense of happiness and self-esteem. So in other words, sexual activity has been assumed as a kind of an indicator of a general quality of life, general well-being in a more holistic sense. So there's been lots of importance given to this, right, in terms of active and healthy way, or actively or gracefully aging, or aging in a successful way, if we look at this successful aging discourse, right? So this emphasis on sexuality also challenges this idea that older people are asexual, right? It shows that sexuality and the process of aging are actually not related, right? So it would be like one of the positive aspects of this discourse, right? And also being desirable and sexually appealing are especially important to women, who very often tend to perceive themselves from a perspective of others, and especially from the external male gaze. So men's attention is often seen kind of as a marker of femininity, of desirability, and often generates a feeling of self-worth and self-esteem. So disguised under this anonymity of a holiday, right, of being somewhere away from your typical comfort zone, tourists can engage in casual sex without the fear of being seen, or the fear of threatening the social position or a reputation at home. In fact, the sense anonymity per se, right, operates as kind of a catalyst for to do things that actually we do not do at home. And one of these would be like, this sexual activities or intimate emotional encounters with others, with strangers. And also many studies show that many women tend to associate sex with love and romance. Therefore, we have this distinction between women's sexual tourism as romance tourism and men's as sex tourism, right? And also emotional implications, right, that are much more presence in this overall experience of sexual adventure for women. However, very importantly also that we have these temporal boundaries, right, surrounding casual sex and romance, that when this happy and very nice holiday time is over, many women might experience emotional damage, because, we have to go back to the previous lives, right, in a sense, or to the previous environments and places. And the fact that it is over may also lead to loneliness, to psychological damage, and also lowering the self-esteem and also the quality of life and a sense of well-being. And also, apart from this more emotional damage, casual sex abroad is also closely linked to unsafe sex and sexually transmitted diseases. Of course, there is no time to talk about this, but it's a very broad topic, has been explored very in detail in the research. So, of course, that's another important issue to consider. However, these aspects, right, these more negative aspects of casual sexual encounters away from home are not voiced out in successful aging discourse, or in active and healthy aging discourse, and leisure tourism, and also sexual education agendas and programs for older people. So very briefly, what I wanted to do in this presentation is kind of sought to encourage more critical approach to this complex interplay of women's sexuality, of female aging, the psychological well-being, and also quality of life, and also self-esteem in leisure tourism, especially in relation to, let's say, more casual sexual encounters. So although sexual or romance tourism, if you like, has many benefits, it also has many downsides. Therefore, there is a need of more interdisciplinary investigation and communication between different fields of study, especially among researchers and scholars working in the fields of leisure tourism, of health, of age, psychology, sexuality, gender, women's studies, right, and related discipline. And most importantly, we need to have the voices of people themselves, right? To have more qualitative studies that focus more on more, let's say, insider views of experiences of people who go abroad, who experience these things, to make research more person-centered and also more inclusive, and more, to hear the voices, subjective experiences of older people. And well, I kind of forgot what I had my presentation on slides, but actually this is more or less what I said. And in case you might be interested in this topic, I've written a paper which is called "On the Hunt for Some Noble Savages, Romance Through Aging Femininities." It is open access, so if you're interested, this was like a very short, very brief presentation and summary of the aspects are being explored in this paper. And also another paper that I published a couple of years ago. It talks about this relationship, right? This complex interplay between this idea of sex and sexual encounters, and this successful aging discourse in senior leisure tourism. So if you might be interested, here's another article. And also, since I finished talking about the importance of narratives, importance of giving more voice to older people in order to better understand this complex interplay between sexuality, between self-esteem, between aging femininities and leisure tourism. So just a couple of months ago, I published this article that focuses on contemporary American writer Erica Jong. Perhaps some of you are familiar with her. She's been a very important voice for women's liberation movement in the 60s and 70s in the United States. And I focused on both her personal accounts of her travel experiences, very intimate travel experiences in one of the most, let's say, erotic and exotic cities, Venice, and also on her fiction and in relation to aging femininities, in relation to her exploration of her being an older woman experiencing sexual encounters with Venetian gondoliers and stuff. So you might be interested in this. Here you have a link. And finally, since I cannot be here with you, it's a great pity, but here I leave you my email account in case you might be interested in exploring other aspects related to the topics that I present, or just have a discussion, or have some ideas, or have some suggestions. So I'd be very happy to hear from you. And yeah, thank you very much again for organizing this event. Thank you very much for having me here. I hope that after this event you have very great and interesting discussions. And yeah, let's keep in touch. Thank you very much and have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.